Today you're gonna learn how to draw these super cute flowers using brush pens. I kinda did a little mix of different brush pens I had around, so feel free to use whatever pens you have. Let's start with our first design. So this one, we can start with some simple circles like this to position our flowers on paper, and then we can use a bit of a darker color to draw the petals at the bottom of each circle like this. We're not going to go all around each little circle because we want the flowers to look like they're facing upwards. I also love adding a little bit of shadows by using a little bit of a darker tone on one side of the little circles, like I'm doing with this darker yellow right here. Then we can draw the stems and leaves interconnecting at the bottom. And I was kind of not really vibing with this color of this flower right here, so I decided to change the petal colors to pink. And I think the contrast looks so much better now. Now this is totally optional, but you can add little lines like this coming from the center of each flower towards the petals like this to add a little texture to it. I'm kind of doing something similar here with this darker green color and adding some little details like making the stem a little bit more defined and adding some little veins in each leaf. You can kind of play with these different tones back and forth like this to make the flower more or less detailed. As you can see, I used basically 2 tones of yellow, 2 pinks, and 2 greens, and you can even use more tones for each color if you want your flower to be a little bit more elaborate. Next, we're going to do some yellow daisies. So start with your circles with a light yellow and use a darker tone of yellow or even a light orange to position the petals all around each of these little circles. I'm starting with just lines like this, and it kind of looks more like sun rays in the beginning. I know it's not looking like flowers yet, but then from here you have all the petals positioned on paper, and you can go over them again to define them a little bit better and make their shape less pointy and a little bit more rounded so they look like actual petals. I also love to make the petals a tiny bit darker where they're closer to the center, and here you can add some good contrast by using a darker pen like this. It could be either a light or a darker brown, and you're basically going to do a bunch of dots all around these little circles that are in the center of each flower, and you're going to make one side darker by making more dots there and fading them to less and less dots, leaving a light orange spot to one side of each circle like this. So it kind of looks like a little bit of like a highlight. Then you can add your stems and try to make them with a slight curve, not completely straight, to make the shapes a little bit more organic. And then you can add the leaves. I wanted to make a bit of a different shape for this leaf, so I added this little dents on the side, and I think it's such a cute detail for this flower. Now let's move on to a lavender flower. Let's start with 3 lines like this with a light violet color, and then along these 3 lines we're going to add these little shapes that you can create with 3 short strokes. You're going to do this over and over until they are all covering the 3 main lines. Also, make sure you make the shapes at the bottom a little bit larger, and as they go up, they become slightly smaller. Now, you guys know me, I love a good little shadow to add some depth, so I'm using a slightly darker tone here to make the right side of each tone, to make the right side of each one of these little shapes a little bit darker like this. And for this one, I wanted to define it a little bit more, so I'm using an even darker tone of purple to add yet another smaller layer of color on the same darker side of each one of these little shapes. It's kind of weird to describe it, but you see what I'm doing here, right? Then once you're done, you can use your green to draw the stem and some longer leaves like this. Feel free to play with different tones of green as they're going to give a whole different effect, and it's really pretty to see a variety of different colors. So I would recommend that you don't stick to the same green for all of your flowers. Just kind of play with it, make some of them lighter, some of them more brownish tones, some of them like a darker green, and I think that looks really pretty. For our next flower, I wanted them to be a little bit more loose and random, so I'm just doing some simple brush strokes to create 4 or 5 petals for each of these flowers. And as you can see here, their direction is pretty random. One is facing down, the other is up in different directions, and you can do this with whatever color you want. I basically started here with some gray just to mark the position of the petals. I used this burned red color to make them a little bit more colorful afterwards, so you can always do that. If you're a little bit unsure of the shape, you can start with like a super light color and then add the color on top of it later. I wanted a little bit of a lighter color for this flower, but I seem to always fall back into some more vivid tones just because I think they're so pretty. But anyway, then you can do the stems and leaves, and for this one I chose the mustard color to add some variety to the colors. And you can also add these little lines coming out of the flowers like this, so they kind of look a little bit more like lilies. And to finish it up, you can add a little detail on top of these little lines with the same color of your flowers. Now this one, I don't know if you can actually call it a flower. I guess it's more like little berries, but I think they fit our theme. So basically start with some circles that are slightly different in size, and you can go go over each circle again with the same tone or a little bit of a darker tone, basically on one side of each circle. So you're basically going around each of the circles and leaving a little highlight area to one side of it. You see what I'm doing here, right? It's kind of weird to describe it, but you're always going to try to keep the same direction because this will look kind of like a little bit of a shadow, and the light spot is going to look a little bit like a highlight. So it's really pretty and it adds a little bit of depth to your drawing. Stems interconnecting at the bottom as usual. Add some pretty leaves like this. You can always play with the sizes of the leaves, and with a thin brush and a darker green, you can add some veins to the leaves like this, add some textures and some shadows. For the stems, you can also add a little bit of a shadow right underneath each one of the berries, and I think that looks super cute. For our next one, I wanted to take a little bit of a risk and make something a little bit different and more stylized. So I started with this U shapes like this with these little lines in the middle. I did the stems all with the same pale yellow tone, and I added some small stems with little leaves, as you can see here. Then with a dark red, this is kind of like a burgundy color, we can add some dots to the tips of each one of these lines. I wanted to define the leaves a little bit more, so with a thinner brush and a little bit of a darker tone, I guess this is kind of like a caramel color, you can basically add some veins and shadows to the stems like this. It's a super delicate touch, but I think it makes such a difference. Our next one will be a little bit more elaborate. You're going to start with the petals, shaping them around an invisible circle like this. And you can play a little bit with a darker tone to make the insides of the petals darker. I struggled a little bit to find the right tone, as you can see here. So I just kept layering different tones until I found the right one I was looking for. The only problem that I see whenever we layer too many colors like this is that it creates a little bit of a noisy effect to the final color. As you can see here, the insides of the flowers there's like a little bit of noise to that color. I personally like that, but if you don't like that, you want to find your tone before coloring and you don't want to play too much with the layering. I also decided to add a second flower for this one and draw it in a slightly different position to make it more organic. So it's basically in a little bit of a diagonal position in comparison with the first one. And as you can see, the process is the same. You start with the petals and then you color the inside of the petals. You can use a darker tone to make the insides a little bit darker to create some contrast. And then with the same tone of the petals, you can add an extra layer at the bottom of the petals to add some depth. Here, I'm using a light brown tone to add some definition to this flower. And this means basically adding a little bit of this darker tone in between the petals and where there would be a shadow basically. And to wrap this one up, just add the stems and some simple leaves to it, and it looks so cute already. But I was kind of not vibing so much with this peach tone for this flower, so I decided to add a light pink on top of it, and I think it looks so much better like this. And this was flower number 7. We have 4 more to go, so stick with me. This next one is going to be super cute and simple. Basically start with a circle and then add some little curves all around it like this. And don't forget to leave a little circle inside the middle empty, as this will be the center of our flower. Now you can add the stems and the leaves, and for this one I decided to go with some longer leaves in this light brown color, and then with a bit of a darker tone of brown you can add some extra definition on the stems and leaves. You can also add some veins on the leaves, add some definition to the flowers. And when I say add definition, you see what I'm doing here. I'm basically contouring it a little bit. I am going in between the petals a little bit so that they are more clearly visible. You kind of separate them from each other a little bit more. And to add a little final touch to this flower, you can also add some fast dots like this all around the white circle in the middle. And it looks so cute like this. And it looks so pretty. I think this one is one of my favorites. Now for the last 2 ones, the process is very similar. As you can see, you basically choose a color for the flowers. As I'm doing a pink here, you can make it as defined and structured or as loose and random as you want. Then you can choose a tone of green or something close enough to green. It could be a little caramel color, a little mustard color, or either sort of a blue with a tint of green. And you can add the stems and leaves. And the leaves can have all sorts of different shapes and sizes and quantities, so you can really play with it to find some fun formats. On this next one, I'm doing the same thing, drawing some blue flowers, adding a darker green for the stems, and playing with these long leaves like this. I really like the long leaves, to be honest. I think they look really stylish. I also use a darker tone of purple in the end to make the top of the flowers a little bit darker like this, and I think it looks nice. It adds a little bit of texture to it. I actually went back to our previous flower here to add a little bit more of this texture to the leaves and add an orange tint to it. And I honestly think this looks a little bit better. For some reason, I wasn't vibing with the pink this time. And to be be honest, I just love layering the colors. I think they look so good. And finally, our last flower, just to fill out this empty-ish space at the left of the page, we can do this pile of yellow dots. So they basically start with a larger base and pile up to a pointy top. You can add some leaves curving out of the bottom like this. And for this, I chose to go with this light brown again. And from here, you can just add the stem and the leaves coming out of the stem. To finish this up, I used some darker tones of yellow and orange to add a little bit more texture to the yellow part. So you can basically just add some extra dots in the center, going up and around, leaving the center a little bit darker for this pile of yellow dots. And this is how you draw these super cute flowers. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps my channel out. And let me know in the comments what you would like to see next. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!